Do you want to know the secret that top high school baseball players use while approaching college coaches? Your son is one simple step away from making his dreams a reality. Before we get started, my name is Evan Mendoza and I have 7 years of professional baseball experience between the St. Louis Cardinals and San Diego Padres. I also played in a World Baseball Classic with Columbia, spent 3 years at the D1 level at NC State University, and I was also on varsity all 4 years of my high school baseball career, so I'm here to share all that knowledge with you. If you want your player to work directly one-on-one with me, go down below in the description to learn more about the triple play. All right, so this is going to be how we build relationships with college coaches, and I really want to emphasize the fact that you really need to get on these college coaches early. So I want to tell you a quick story about the United States Naval Academy and their head coach when I was a freshman in high school. So I had a really successful year my freshman year of high school, and Severna Park High School was maybe a few miles away from the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. So obviously, I performed very well for the local high school, and the head coach, he recognized my performance, and he invited me to an unofficial visit right after my freshman year. And obviously, the NCAA rules were a lot different then, but he went through the whole process of a normal visit. He showcased the entire Naval Academy, which was awesome. I think it was the summertime, so I got to see some plebes getting after it, and he showcased, what the overall campus felt like, the dorms. He also went through the baseball facilities, the weight room, all of the facilities that we would be using as a player for the Naval Academy. He also took me and my family up into his office to explain further on what the process would look like, and ultimately he gave a good 2 to 3 hours of his time just really explaining the whole process of playing college baseball. And it was really cool because obviously, number one, I got on his radar very, very early. But the cool full circle moment was when I was playing at NC State University, and in 2016 when I had my breakout year hitting 362, in the regionals hosted in Raleigh, North Carolina, the United States Naval Academy, I think, was the 3rd seed. So I was able to reconnect with that head coach from the Naval Academy, and he remembered me. He shook my hand, he gave me a hug, and that is a lasting impression and ultimately a relationship that I was able to build with that specific head coach for the Naval Academy. So what is your best asset, or really, what is your son's best asset in the game? And I hate to break it to you, but in the recruiting process, it's not his arm, it's not his hitting abilities, right? It's not how fast he runs, it's not his glove, right? It's none of these. It's not even his IQ of the game, right? The best asset that your son has in the entire recruiting process is a simple thing called video. And if you are not using this to your advantage, I can't stress this enough. There are people all across the country that are using video to their advantage. They're creating a database for all of these college coaches to be able to understand truly who you are as a baseball player and who your son is as a baseball player. So if you're not using video, you are well behind the curve. And I know a lot of parents like talking to me about how they don't have enough video of their son, and they don't record video during the game. Maybe they're a little superstitious. I know my mom was, but ultimately it doesn't take a lot. Have your son just film himself on his phone when he's hitting in the cage next time he goes to the cage, all right? So let's now talk about the path to college. So step number one really is to research. You should be doing a certain level of research on the colleges out there and what they provide you. I always like to say the relationship between high school seniors specifically and really even juniors, but the process of the recruiting process, it's kind of like dating, right? You don't necessarily want to go towards the college that approaches you first because it might not be the best fit. Well, in dating, it's the same thing. You don't necessarily want to just start a relationship with the first girl that ever talks to you, right? So it's a fun way that I like to kind of put the pieces together of kind of visualizing what you should be doing to look for in these colleges. For me, I studied engineering, and I did aerospace, right? Aerospace engineering is not offered at every single university, so that was my filtering process of understanding which colleges had it, which colleges didn't. My next thing was really, baseball. Obviously, I wanted to go to a good baseball facility, a good baseball team, organization, a culture that had winning, things like that. And then really location, coaches, all these things are very important. So that was my criteria when I was doing this research, right? There's a lot of different components when it comes to the researching. Obviously, the record, the other teams that they're playing, the first game of their season, because let's be honest, their first game at their home stadium, especially if you're in the Northeast, might be a month into the season because you're playing a lot of the time down south, right? So number one, you want to research, right? And then you want to start the comms, right? Communication is very important, and that's how we're ultimately able to get on these college coaches' radars. And if we're not communicating with these college coaches after August 1st, or really even before August 1st of our junior year, we are going to be left in the dust. And I know a lot of you guys are probably asking yourselves, like, well, Evan, we can't physically email these college coaches before August 1st. It's like against the rules and all that. Yes and no. And that's where I really want to instruct you and hopefully leave you with this video better than what I found you with. Yes, you can email these college coaches. They just can't legally respond back to you. So I actually instruct a lot of my sophomores inside my academy. It is a good time to start getting yourself on their radar. Whether or not they can respond or not, they can still click on your emails and they can 100% most certainly watch your highlight videos, do a little bit of research on your YouTube database that you've been building out. So step number 2 is really that comms, and then that's when we're able to really hopefully get some responses, but more importantly, we want to get some interest. Ultimately, this is something that I know a lot of people come to me for, is they're just not generating enough interest or really even exposure. This is an area where, if you understand it correctly, exposure is going to happen before these camps and evaluation events, right? So that's going to be, the next step. You want to get evaluated in person where these college coaches are able to actually see your player play with their own eyes, in the flesh, right? Because this is ultimately a time where these college coaches, I hate to break it to you, but like they kind of almost want to see your player fail, because is he the guy that takes off his hat and throws it down? Is he a guy that slams his helmet or throws his bat or shows bad body language? All of that isn't necessarily shown in a highlight video, because a highlight video, it showcases all the great things that you do. Well, guess what? Baseball is like 75%, more like 80% failure, right? So how are we, adjusting to all those failures, right? After that evaluation, this is also where we're able to really get some offers. We can get some interest. We can have even more communication. We actually, before the offers, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is when we need to nurture those relationships. Just like I did with that United States Naval Academy head coach, we nurtured that relationship because I thought that there might be a possibility, but I ultimately closed that door pretty early because I understood that I was supposed to serve 4 years if I attended the Naval Academy, ultimately ending my entire baseball career after college. So you need to nurture those relationships that are showing interest, and then that's when you're able to, hopefully after a couple of evaluation events, it could be games, it could be camps, it could be showcases, that's when ultimately they will offer you or your son. And that's going to be the holy grail, where it's going to feel like an entire weight is just being lifted off of your shoulder. But again, you don't want to go to the first team that offers you. Ultimately, we want to use this as leverage now on the teams that we are a little bit more interested in, basically showing that other coaches are interested in either yourself or your son. And I think it's really important to note, we really have to be good at self-evaluating. And if we're not good at self-evaluating, this is going to be a lot harder as far as this whole college recruiting process. So let's say in our self-evaluation process, we think we're throwing 95 miles an hour, right? But we're actually throwing 75, right? We're probably not D1 bound, especially let's say if we're a senior, right? If we think we have an exit velocity of, let's say, 100 off of the tee, and we're hyping ourselves up, or maybe our parents are hyping ourselves up, saying that we're the greatest baseball player in the entire world, Shohei Ohtani 2.0 in the flesh. Might not be true though, right? So again, you think you might have an exit velocity because you hit a line drive up the middle one time, Well, guess what? Your average exit velocity might be like 60 miles an hour. Your son's probably not ready to go D1 in that case, right? Also, let's say like, hey, my son's the greatest in the world. He is not struggling with a single thing, but maybe he's 5'9", 120 pounds as a junior. That is not ready to go D1. So we really need to focus on that physical development if you find you or your player in that situation. So making sure that we see our self-evaluation and making sure that those results that we're ultimately evaluating ourselves on match up together, right? It's the worst thing, guys. I can't stress this enough. It is the worst thing to think, like for me, the best example that I could really give you is in school, I was not ever good at English class. I was never good at grammar, but I was good at math, right? So if I told myself every single day that I am good at English and I am good at grammar, but I knew deep down I wasn't, guess what that's going to do for our confidence when it comes test time? We're not going to have that confidence that we need to be able to perform at the highest level, right? So that self-analysis is one of the key components that I teach all of my students really to do first and foremost of joining inside my academy. So this is a little bit of an explanation. I think it's very, very fun to be able to visualize things like this. And this isn't necessarily the end all be all, but this is something that hopefully will hold this true in what you've got going on inside the recruiting process to help visualize this. All right, so this little red area, this is D1, right? Because obviously we know there's D1, there's D2, there's D3, there's JUCO and NAIA, right? So there's different levels that your son could potentially play in, right? This area right here would be more or less D2. And if you can, tell right now, we have different areas. We have your son performing in game. It's very, very important that he performs in the game. He also has that IQ of a baseball player. He understands the game to a deeper level. He doesn't just hit home runs and that's all he does. He actually has that knowledge, right, of the game. And then also he has those metrics and tools. I'm not saying he's a 5-tool player, but maybe he has 2 exceptional tools that he's well above the rest of the competition, right? So that could be throwing like 90 miles an hour or running like a 60, maybe like a 6.6 second 60, right? So these are going to be things that are well above and beyond that. Basically, if someone throws 90 and is a 6'6", but doesn't have that IQ, and maybe he shows that performance, maybe D2 is exactly where he belongs, right? That's just one instance, right? But let's say he runs a 6'6" and he is the smartest guy in the world in the game of baseball, but he just doesn't perform when it matters. D2 might be the route, right? So there's obviously you can play around with this and there's many different ways to really understand this, but D2 is basically that blue area right there. And then last but not least, these bigger areas where maybe you have one area, right? Maybe you throw 95 miles an hour, but you're not getting it done in the classroom. You don't take care of your body. You have bad attitude, things like that. Well, guess what? You might end up at a D3 or even a JUCO, right? So obviously the holy grail is this D1 level where you're able to really showcase to college coaches, yes, you can perform when it matters, because guess what? It matters. Performance matters. And when college coaches show up to your games, you better be ready to actually perform. You better be taking it seriously. Obviously, you can have fun, but you don't want to be showcasing that you're a goofball, not knowing what's actually going on. You also want to showcase that you actually understand the game. The specific game that the NC State coach went to watch me pitch, I picked off both base runners that were on the base paths. I only allowed 2 base runners in a 6 or 7 inning game, and it was a complete game shutout, 70 pitches, I believe, 2 base runners, and because I knew my abilities, I looked over when I was on the mound, I saw the lead that they were getting, and I thought to myself, yeah, I'm going to pick off this guy. And I did that twice, right? Because I just knew the game. The game was slower for me, and I understood what I was capable of. So I showcased that IQ that's very essential at that D1 level. And guess what? I also topped out at, I believe, 89 that game, right? So my velocity was there. I didn't necessarily hit 90 until maybe later in fall ball of my senior year was the very first time I actually hit 90, which I was pumped. But basically, I showcased my IQ. I showcased the performance of actually getting it done, and I had the metrics Well, guess what? That's where I found myself right there in the middle, ready to become a D1 athlete. Now, if your high school baseball player wants to become a college prospect, go down below in the description and download the 27-page blueprint. I walk through exactly what it would look like working together and how we could implement the triple play for your player.